Well, hello, this is Adam, and welcome back to Rare Classic Cars. Today we're back on the porch. Unfortunately, winter is approaching, so thought I'd do a porch chat here. Lots of topics we can talk about, but today I thought we would talk about something that somebody emailed me about, and that is, what's my opinion on some of the best carburetors? And we could also do worse, but what are some of the best ones out there? So, there's not really any brand that I would say that's really just hit a home run across the board with carburetors. They all have some good ones and they all have some bad ones. And in general, I will say that two-barrel carburetors tend to have less issues than the four-barrel carburetors. My list of good two-barrel carburetors would be longer than the four-barrel list, just because I think there are a decent number of bad four-barrel carburetors, but let's get into it in any case. So here's my little list. We've got the chalkboard back. Best carburetors, start with the two barrels. First one, Motorcraft 2100. So it's amazing. Ford had a great two-barrel carburetor for many years, the Motorcraft 2100, later superseded by the variable Venturi carburetor, which was terrible. And they also had the four-barrel version of it, which was the 4100, superseded by the 4300, which was terrible. So something worked when it came to this 2100. It was a good carburetor, actually a great carburetor, super reliable, super easy to repair. I mean, these things, you can leave them on the car in general, and you can repair the accelerator pump by just taking out 4 screws. The accelerator pump is external. You don't even have to take the carburetor apart. 4 screws, move it out of the way, replace the diaphragm, done. You can change the jets out easily if you want. You can change the needle and seat out without removing the carburetor from the car. You just take the top off very easily and change. You take out the float is clipped in. You take the float out, and then you take the needle and seat out, put it back in, you're done. You can take the jets out with the top off as well. The only thing you really have to remove the carburetor for is the power valve, which is on the underside of the carburetor if you want to replace that or you're having problems with it. But I mean, these are just so good, so reliable. Ford tended to use and have two barrels standard, I would say, on more engines than even GM did. And I think it was for a good reason. They were less troublesome. The cars feel peppier initially with the two-barrel carburetor as well. And they use them on everything, all the way up to, I have a 71 Mercury Marquis with a 429 two-barrel V8. And it works just fine. It works, I think, brilliantly. Yeah, does it have a little wheeziness at the upper RPM range? Sure, but the two-barrel cars, especially for Fords, tend to feel peppier at regular street speeds than the four barrels. So it's a trade-off that you have to evaluate when you're buying a Ford. But long story short, Motorcraft 2100, excellent carburetor. I can't say enough good about it. I wish they had kept the 4100 as their four-barrel, because it was really good as well. And like I said, the 4300 that came out in 1967 was terrible. And so for the Ford lovers out there, I run the Motorcraft 4300s on a lot of my cars, but I don't think they're very good. And if the car came with an Edelbrock or a Holly on it, I've left it as opposed to changing it back. They run much better with either of those than they do with the stock carburetor. So that's the first one. Second one, Carter BBD. You could find this Carter BBD on, gosh, so many different cars. AMCs use them a lot on their 6-cylinders. Dodges use them on the slant 6s. I shouldn't just say Dodges. Chrysler cars use them on the slant 6s and the 318 V8s. Unfortunately, some cars use them with the lean burn setup, which the lean burn wasn't that great. But I find Carter BBDs to generally be quite good and reliable. I think the only issues I've had, particularly with the AMC cars that have them, is that the idle jets tend to clog a little bit, and then the car will stall, will idle a little bit rough. But I find that's easily remedied by, if you look down the throat of the carburetor, you will see 2 air inlet holes in the very front, and those are the idle jet vents. And I just take a can of carburetor cleaner and put the little straw, if you will, in the hole, squirt it a few times in both holes, and every time so far I've had an idling issue, I've done that and it clears it up and it's done. And yeah, I would say that I've had maybe more idling issues with these than others, but the fix is so easy that compared to some of the others, and the carburetors prove so reliable. I've never had one flood out, as an example. I've never had one really, be boggy. So I'm going to put it on my list of good carburetors. I think they're quite good. Like I said, there are some, feedback BBD carburetors, especially part of the lean burn system from Chrysler, that, maybe are a little bit wonky. They were lean burn carburetors, so they were jetted lean. I don't think that's a fault of the carburetor, though. And you can fix that too. You take the cover off of the top of the carburetor. I can't remember, I think there's 3 screws. You take the cover off. You don't have to take the whole top off. There's just a cover. And then that's where the metering rods are. And the metering rods, even on the lean burn cars, are adjustable. So you loosen a screw, and then you can move the metering rod so that they will pull out of the jet sooner or later. And so what I do is I call it my Chrysler cars that have lean burn, less lean burn. I basically have the metering rods pull out of the jet sooner, and that improves throttle response tremendously. You can run more ignition advance because you'll get less detonation. When a car is running a lean combustion mixture, it tends to run hotter. And when it runs hotter, then you get more spark, knock, and detonation. So richening it up not only gives you the benefit of improved throttle response just because you're giving it a richer mixture, you can also now advance the timing more because you don't have such a lean mixture. So we can go through that in more detail on what I do on the lean burn carburetors to make them run better. I do that on my 83 Grand Fury, and works like a charm. Have a lot better pep from pulling away at a stoplight with a 318 V8, even though it's got like a 2.2 to 1 rear end, super tall rear end. And that's a whole nother story, that rear end, that 7.25, 7.5 inch rear end from Chrysler. I think it's 7.25. Not good. Not a good rear end. Topic for another day. Next, Rochester 2GC carburetor. I think, again, really reliable. These actually, I would say, also had really good CFM, or cubic feet per minute, airflow for 2 barrels. The Fords weren't quite as good in the Carter BBDs. These Rochester 2GCs, you could get almost 500 CFM out of them. And really the difference between operating one on an engine and Quadrajet, in spite of the Quadrajet having much larger and, well, first of all, having secondaries and then having very large secondaries, really wasn't that great, especially on the smaller engines, like 350 cubic inch engines and below, where having an 800 CFM 4-barrel Quadrajet, just you couldn't use all that CFM, but you could certainly on a Cadillac 500, or a let's say a Chevrolet 454, especially the high revving, premium fuel ones. The lower revving ones, you even didn't need that big of CFM on them because they just weren't sucking in that much air when they're making peak power at 3,600 RPMs. But nonetheless, 2GC, really good carburetor, and as I said, it flows almost 500 CFM. The Motorcraft is about, I think, top CFM is in the 440, 450 CFM range on those. And, consequently, it's almost as good as a 4-barrel in some cases. I would say, most 4-barrels like the Motorcraft 4300s are 600 CFM. The Quadrajets, depending on what model year, can be up to 800 CFM. And yes, the 4-barrel carburetors are rated on a different CFM meter than the 2-barrel carburetors. I get that. But believe me when I say that the Rochester 2GC, I think of all the 2-barrel carburetors, really flows the best. And, the best proof is in the pudding. If you look at 1972 Chevrolet horsepower ratings, if you got a 350 with this 2GC on it, it made 165 horsepower. If you got it with the Quadrajet, it made 175 horsepower. And frankly, I think the 2GC feels peppier, especially at lower speeds. Just feels a lot torquier. So Good carburetor, very reliable. You can't change the accelerator pump externally like the Motorcraft. So it's a little bit more complicated, but I find them to be highly reliable, never give me trouble, really like them. Let's go to the 4-barrels. So I've got 2 on there. And by the way, this list isn't in any given order. I think it'd be hard to rank them amongst these, but I love the Rochester Quadrajet. I think it's a great carburetor. I think they're very reliable. They do have some drawbacks. I would say that one is the size of the fuel bowl in them. It's pretty small. So if you're doing quarter-mile drag strip racing or something, it can be challenging to get the fuel flow in there that's required so that you don't lean out at the end of the drag strip, as an example. But I mean, we're not doing that normally on cars, and you could put a higher pressure fuel pump or things like that to help out, which, by the way, some GM vehicles did, like the Rivieras from the late 60s, early 70s. They actually have an electric fuel pump, believe it or not, to help out with that, just purposely so they don't lean out under significant throttle application. So that's one drawback, is the size of the overall float bowl. The second is these have these nitrofill floats, as most do, but the float bowl is so small and the nitrofill float sits in the middle between the primary venturis. And now, especially with the ethanol gas, what happens is that nitrofill float swells and it contacts the primaries and it sticks and then it floods out. Not necessarily a problem with the carburetor design, but something that I think the ethanol fuels are not helping out with. They can be a little bit complicated to work on. I think they got better as the years went on. The early Quadrajets have lots of these little clips and things that make it so that you really have to take it off of the car. You don't want to be losing clips down into the throat of the throttle body there. But the later ones were much easier. They had, by the mid-70s, they had a lot of screws to take off the primary vacuum brake or the choke pull-off. They didn't have the clips. They, again, had screws and things like that. So it really facilitates, as opposed to taking the whole carburetor off the car. You can just pop the air horn off and work on it inside. And that's my preferred way of really working on those carburetors from that era, because not that I don't like to do the job right the first time, but what I find is the carburetor kits today just suck. And so the problem is that they often have the wrong parts, the wrong gaskets. And on my 75 Ols, as an example, I took the carburetor off, and even the air horn gasket that came with the kit was not the right air horn gasket. So I had to reuse the gasket, and it's just a headache nowadays. Unfortunately, it's hard to get the right parts. And so the fewer things that I can do to fix the car and get it back on the road, unfortunately, that's where I am, as opposed to being more preventive in the maintenance. And also the parts quality now has tended to decrease. So I used to be big on replacing fuel pumps early, because you don't want the diaphragm to tear and then it leaks gas into the oil and then you lose the lubricating properties of the oil. I really don't do that anymore unless it's an original fuel pump and it's now 50 years old. That's just not good to be operating one of those, I believe. But I just check the oil, smell it, see if I smell anything, any gas scent, because I've replaced some of those fuel pumps preventively, and then the new ones have stopped working, like within a couple days. So that really defeated the purpose. Same with alternators. I used to proactively replace them. The rebuild quality on a lot of these alternators and starters is not that good. I try to use name brand products. They seem to be a little better, but I still wouldn't call them, in some cases, as good as the 50-year-old parts that are on the car. So my little diatribe there. But Quadrajet, I think other than that, some of the mid-70s models do have a bog. I think they got a reputation for being the quadrabog. Sometimes it depends on if you have the screws for the secondaries. There's a screw that controls the spring and how fast those open. Sometimes that spring is broken, and if it's broken, those flop open instantly and will cause a bog. But they have their issues, but I think they're excellent. They deliver great fuel economy with the super small primaries and big secondaries, and I find them to be reliable. The second one, I think, is a pretty undisputed, excellent 4-barrel carburetor, and I'd probably rank it above the Quadrajet. The Carter AFB, the aluminum 4-barrel AFB. Excellent carburetor. So simple to work on. not prone to trouble at all. Great throttle response. I mean, I don't know what more to say about it. I don't know that I can say anything bad about it. The float bowl is adequately sized. It's easy to work on. It's reliable. You know, this is basically what Edelbrock patterned their carburetor off of. By the way, Carter for some years did actually manufacture Quadrajets too for GM because Rochester division couldn't make enough of them. But the AFB is, like I said, Edelbrock patterned their carburetor after it, and it's stellar. The Edelbrocks are especially easy because you can change the metering rods and the springs for them without doing anything aside from removing 2 screws, which is great for tuning. So yeah, I think the AFB is really the pinnacle. I have one on my 65 Bonneville, came with its stock, and I think there's really not much to improve upon on it. So that's my short list of the best carburetors of all time. Let me know what your thoughts are, and we could certainly do more on the worst. You heard some of them. I talked about the variable Venturi carburetor, the Motorcraft 4300. Didn't mention any GM carburetors. Chrysler typically bought theirs. They had Holleys, the Carter thermo quads and things like that, and the BBDs. But GM had theirs, I would say, more in the feedback era, in the 80s era. Chrysler had theirs, but often not on the Chrysler cars, more on the Mitsubishi engines that came in Chrysler cars. Although some of the early, like Chrysler 2.2 carburetors and things like that, which were not Chrysler manufactured, that they bought, were not great either. So the whole industry kind of struggled with those early feedback carburetors. But that's my short list of the best ones. Hope you enjoyed that porch chat. Let me know if you enjoyed being back out here on the porch. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, take care. So let's just take a look at why this Motorcraft 2100 is so great here on my 73 LTD with the 400 engine. So here we have it, the Motorcraft 2100, and this is why it's so easy. You want to take the top off to change the needle and seat or the float. Just take these screws off. This comes off. You're ready to work. You want to change the accelerator pump. That's what this is. Take these 4 screws out, take that off, put the diaphragm in there. By the way, there's 2 settings here, rich and a lean setting for the accelerator pump, depending on what you want to use. The power valve is underneath here. It's on the bottom. So that's the one thing that you have to take the carburetor off to service, but it's very easy to take these carburetors off as well. This just twists off, no problem. You got to take the clip off for the transmission kickdown rod. Take these 4 nuts off, unhook the this car's electric choke here, and that's it. It comes right off. Couldn't be much easier. The only thing I would say you want to watch out for is this choke pull off. You can see I put a new one on here. So when this is closed, this is what pulls it off. You can see there's 3 screws. It's pretty easy to get those off, but there's a roll pin here that you have to punch out. And you want to do that very gently and very slowly if you're just a one-person operation, because you punch hard and you're going to lose that roll pin somewhere in this compartment or on the ground, and you won't find it again. So have a helper if you want as you're tapping this so that you don't lose it, or just tap very, very gently once you get to the end of the travel. So that's the one thing you got to be careful of. And obviously the fuel filter, very easy to replace too. So just great overall carburetor. Thanks for watching this Porch Chat. Let me know if you enjoyed the return to the Porch Chats, and like, comment, and subscribe. Check out the video thumbnails at bottom left and right as well for some suggestions for you. Until next time, thanks again for watching, and take care.